Zambia has resumed vote counting in its presidential and parliamentary elections after calling a halt on Friday over alleged attacks on polling staff and the theft of some marked ballots. The country's electoral commission said the security threat to the process had been contained and necessary measures put in place to enable the counting to continue. Despite 14 candidates being on the presidential ballot, the contest has largely been seen as a two-horse race between the incumbent Hakainde Hichilema, seeking a second term, and challenger Brian Mundubile. To discuss this further, we can now bring in Sishuwa Sishuwa, a senior lecturer at Stellenbosch University and the author of Party, Politics, and Populism in Zambia. Welcome to the program. So, before we talk about the top two candidates, let's talk about this suspension of vote counting. It seems rather unprecedented. I mean, the country is considered by many to be one of Africa's most stable democracies. So, how concerned should we be about this?
Very concerned. It has never happened before since the Electoral Commission of Zambia was established as an independent body in 1996. It's the first time that the Electoral Commission is suspending vote counting. And I think what is even more worrying are the grounds upon which the decision was made. The Commission announced that they were taking the decision because of reported acts of violence in some districts. That contradicts the position of election observers, as well as the president of Zambia, who, at the end of the voting, said the exercise had proceeded peacefully throughout the country. So it was very strange that the commission used unknown acts of violence to base its decision. And then the other point was that if the violence was limited to certain areas, it really did not make sense to suspend vote counting throughout the country. And the Law Association of Zambia, the legal body for lawyers in the country, only yesterday also came in to say there's no law that empowered the commission to make such a decision on a national scale. And finally, the people are also asking the decision on the basis that polling stations are securely, are secured by state officials, the police as well as military police in some cases. So how was it possible that some people came and stole ballot boxes from those polling stations that were heavily guarded? The commission claimed in the statement that some of the ballot boxes were taken away. That, of course, undermines the credibility of the election, because if the ballot boxes were taken away, how do we know that the results that are being announced are actually genuine?
Now, ahead of the voting, Amnesty International had criticized the ruling party for starting to restrict rights and freedoms during campaigning. And now, with this vote counting issue, are we seeing a worrying trend in democratic erosion in the country, do you think?
Yes, 3 days before the vote, Amnesty International issued a report that highlighted the growing authoritarian tendencies, particularly in relation to the rights of peaceful assembly, the freedom of association, and free speech. But that has been characteristic of the current administration over the last 5 years. Political and civil rights have been restricted. A number of repressive laws have been passed that limit civil liberties. And in a sense, the election itself is a referendum on the current administration's commitment to democratic freedoms, because many Zambians, feel that the political space in which they could freely express themselves has shrunk. Opposition parties over the last 5 years were not able to hold public assemblies, and it's only during the campaign period that people were able to associate freely with parties of their choice, and opposition were able to mobilize people through public assemblies. That record contrasts heavily with Zambia's tradition of being, in the context of Southern Africa, a thriving democracy. And many Zambians had expected that the current president, who was elected in 2021, would be different from his predecessors, who also enacted repressive measures and indeed resorted to authoritarian tendencies when dealing with opposition parties.
Now, let's go back to these two top candidates, the President Hichilema and challenger Brian Mundubile. What separates the two candidates? How do their platforms differ?
Well, I think they differ in relation to the fact that the president, Hakainde Hichilema, has been in power for the last 5 years. So he has had a chance over the last 5 years to enact his policies, and voters are able to assess whether he has lived up to the commitments that he had made in the last election. It's the first time that, of course, he has been, this is his first term in office. So it's very different from 2021 when he was competing on the basis of what he would do if elected. During this election, he was campaigning on his record, and voters had the chance to assess him on that score. Brian Mundubile has never before been an opposition leader. He was a provincial minister in the previous administration. He was also a member of parliament in one of the rural constituencies in the northern part of the country. He served as government chief whip when the previous governing party was in power, and when it went into opposition, he served for a few years also as leader of the opposition in the National Assembly. So he had the political experience. He's a lawyer by training, and he was really riding on the promise of doing better than the current president on key issues such as anti-corruption, the state of democracy, national unity, and even the policies of mining, a very crucial industry to Zambia's economy. The cost of living, of course, was a major issue as well, and both candidates were, contrasting themselves on that issue, with the president saying, "Look, we have done what we could, and we can do better if you give us a chance." The opposition leader Mundubile saying, the cost of living is higher now than it was in 2021 when the current administration took power, and it was on that score that he was seeking rather voters as mandate.
Now, one of the other big issues we'd heard was the economy being a central theme. The country had been facing a deep debt crisis, and the majority of that debt is owned by China. So, do they have, influence on what's happening in Zambia?
The Chinese?
Yeah, how involved is Beijing?
Not at all. I don't think that external actors had any role to play in the election. Western countries, for example, are distracted by their only priorities. The Chinese, as you know, are very, very good at operating behind the scenes. So it's very difficult to assess the extent to which they're involved in this election. I think if there are any external actor that were involved at all, it's in relation to mining companies and their role in the economy. One of the major issues is corruption, and sometimes corruption is transnational. Mining corporations were accused in the run-up to elections of financing the current president, for example. And there was a report by UK, a body called Global Witness, an investigative body that suggested that First Quantum Minerals, a Canadian mining giant, had benefited in terms of favorable policies from the current administration, and that in return it had pledged to support his campaign. So that was something that concerned voters. But I think the economy was really assessed in relation to the cost of living, because the government was saying we have reduced inflation to single digit, we have increased the foreign reserves, for example, the kwacha, the national currency, is performing better, compared to other currencies outside the country. And on that basis, they pointed to a positive direction on which they sought re-election. But that kind of rhetoric, contrasts with the experiences of ordinary Zambians who are fighting against the high cost of living exhibited in the prices of essential commodities being higher. So they cannot appreciate being told that the
Yes.
economy is doing very well when there has been very little improvement in their material conditions.
Yes, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us on the program today. That's Sishuwa Sishuwa, senior lecturer at Stellenbosch University and the author of Party Politics and Populism in Zambia.